Hey, welcome back to another Bitcoin Reformation podcast. Great to be with you. Ready for another episode, and should be a fun one. So, Jared, how are things going for you all?
Things in Pennsylvania are into the summer is over and school is around the corner. So we got our letter in the mail for our 3-year-old to go to 2 a day a week preschool. And I think I already cried a couple of times just imagining that thing happening. But it's one of those, wow, I can't believe she's old enough for that. But also, she's showing that she's ready to do more learning and all those sort of things. So, funny story I'll tell you. Last night, my wife was putting her to bed and, was trying to recall the positive things that happened during the day. What did you like? What were you grateful for that we did today? And as my wife tells it, Zoe looked at her and said, "Mommy, I'd like to go to bed now." And that was it. So one of those, thanks, kid. Tell me to stop talking so you can go to sleep. But Silas is, he just turned a year too. So he is running around. And yesterday we were over in the church parking lot and he was running downhill going, like he was some warrior on his way to fight some big battle. So you get all those fun moments that just kind of make you smile, even in the midst of all the craziness and chaos here. So things are well in the family. Work stuff is going well, getting ready for school to start. Our teachers are back next Thursday. So, thinking about how do we bring new staff on board to our mission, our vision here at St. Luke, and just how do we incorporate them into our family of faith and our school as well. So things are chugging along as they go, if you will, here in PA. So, David, how about
Doing
you?
well. Just like less than 48 hours since I've been home. I had been in the great state of Michigan from a Saturday to a Wednesday. In fact, spending time with our Ben Haupt here. We got to play in the sandbox together in Grand Rapids, where the organization I serve hosted a preacher's workshop there. And Ben was our leader, our fearless leader, came up and spent 2.5 days with a really nice group of guys. It's too small of a group, but it was a great group of guys, and really was a joy. Really was a joy. So fresh back from that, our freshman and sophomore started back to high school. Gosh, 8 days ago now. So early August. This coming Monday, we take the junior and college back to school in Irvine, California, and then 2 weeks later, we take a kid off to Phoenix for his freshman year of school at Grand Canyon University. And in the meantime, the junior college is looking at buying a vehicle. So my head's spinning with that used vehicle. So the stress there is, yeah, a little bit the money, but certainly the quality. What does one get for um, a smaller amount of dollars? And then my wife and I need to replace ours. So we've sweated the last couple of years with one college tuition payment, and now we're headed to two and a car payment. So money's on the mind. I literally had a dream last night that Honda had 0% financing. So apparently it's on the mind a little bit, just to share what's happening. As my wife said this morning,
You gonna dream that
she's
one
like,
into
"That's a good dream.
reality?
That's a good dream." But who knows? I've been wondering with the Fed talking about reducing interest rates and very likely doing so here, whether in an emergency session soon or the beginning of September. How long until that hits other industries? I think it'll hit the housing market rather quickly, which would be great news for the Haupt family, possibly, hopefully soon enough. Um, does that affect cars? I have no idea. I don't even know who to ask that question to. But anyways, that's how we are, and still up on the mountain, beautiful sunny skies. The evenings are starting to get a little cooler, which we like, and there you go. It's about time to order up firewood so that it can dry out and season for winter time as we heat our home with firewood. That's what I've got. How about the Haupt family?
It's been a crazy season for the Haupt family. We moved out of our house July 1st. The home that we were going to buy fell through, and we're actually thankful for that. And so we're going to rent for the year. And I think I've told you both individually, but I'm happy to talk about it on the podcast. we kind of put our money where our mouth is and plowed some of what would have been down payment into Bitcoin. So we'll see how that shakes out. But just to let viewers and listeners know that we're not just talking about this in some kind of theoretical sense or in some kind of just hobby sense. My family's livelihood and our potential future is pretty tied up with the Bitcoin project. So we'll see how that all plays out. But it's been a crazy season for us. We're looking forward to being settled in, and kids start school here in a week or so. And for Pastoral Leadership Institute, I've been doing a lot of traveling, meeting with donors and meeting with a variety of different leaders, getting ready for a board meeting. And so just a huge season of travel. Literally every week for the last 4 weeks, I've been on the road for at least 2 or 3 days. And the next couple of weeks are still filled with at least 2 or 3 days of travel each of the weeks. So lots going on there. It was super fun to be with David and 1517 and a bunch of pastors to talk about leading by preaching. But now we're ready to talk about leading by Bitcoin. So Jared, I think you're up for leading the conversation today. So take it away.
Thanks, Ben. One more story before we dive in. As spouses of women that maybe care slightly less than we do, I have to share this story. Last night we were getting ready to go to sleep, and Emily turned to me and she said, "So I hear they're going to lower interest rates." And I said, "Excuse me? What did you say?" So I don't know if that's, I need to thank the Morning Brew, who somehow she's gotten subscribed to that daily email thing, and they talk about Bitcoin and interest rates, but I had to ask her to repeat it because it's just one of those things. I never would have expected you to say those words, yet alone in the context of right before going to sleep. So I immediately, wanted to say, well, do you know what that means for like Bitcoin and quantitative tightening versus easing? And what does it mean for the, and she's like, I'm good. I'm fine. I just wanted to say that.
Into that. Maybe she would have taken a cue from your daughter and said, "Can I go to sleep now? Can I go to sleep now?"
Yeah, right. It's like this weird thing where I seem to always want to like tell her more, and she always continually reminds me, hey, when you're playing those podcasts, like you're usually playing them over a speaker, so I hear them. I'm not ignorant here. I know what's going on. But anyway, not here nor there. Today we're going to talk about our faith and Bitcoin. So we've done a lot, I think, recently to try and sort of turn the page from what is Bitcoin, how does it work, kind of the basics of if I want to buy some, if I want to take custody of it. We talked about that. And then last time we sort of began this conversation of, hey, we're 3 pastors, we love Jesus, and yes, we're here to talk about Bitcoin, and we think that that's maybe where we can contribute the most and the most uniquely. And so I think this is kind of another way for us to do that. And the big overarching question that I want to ask together is a very provocative one, but I'm curious to see. I'll ask both of you guys to answer, and then we'll kind of just run with how and where we go. But if Jesus were alive today, 2024, what would Jesus think of Bitcoin? And here's why I asked that question. Because as pastors, as people who are following Jesus, right? If we're apprentices of him, we want to be like him, we want to think like him, we want to do like him, then we need to think about all that we do through that lens. And so that basic Sunday school question, right? What would Jesus do? Is, I think, applicable in this situation too. And so there's a whole bunch of different ways we could run. But if you had sort of what do you think is the most important place to start? How would you answer the question, what does Jesus think of Bitcoin?
Great question. Ben.
I'll sure I can give it a go. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things that Jesus talked about money an awful lot in the New Testament, in the Gospels. So I was just reading with some friends this morning in a devotional time, Luke 16, 1 to 15. And this is where Jesus talks about the parable of the dishonest manager who was commended for having kind of done a haircut or a coupon on a bunch of people that had bills that were owed to this guy's manager. Um, and Jesus basically says, uh, you know, you can't serve. This is the classic place where he says you can't serve God and money, and then Jesus says anything that humans love basically is an abomination to God. Uh, so it's some shocking words, and at first, I mean, I think that Paul says very similar things with um, the root of the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, right? So it's not that money itself is evil, but the love of it and the accumulation of unending amounts of it, needing bigger barns, all this kind of stuff. That's what Jesus was very quick to point out. It can become an idol and can rob someone of their faith, and yet I would say that's not essentially what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin isn't essentially um, driven by the love of wealth. There's among Bitcoiners, sometimes people talk about NGU, number go up, and there is a love of the number going up among many. But really, at the end of the day, what Bitcoin is a way of uh, preserving one's hard work by means of an honest system. And in that way, I think that Jesus probably would have some very good things to say because it's a much more honest system than a system in which the government can debase the currency and essentially rob the common people of their savings. So those are just a few thoughts from my perspective.
I like what you say about the sort of Jesus and I mean, he's getting after the heart, right? That he's interested in who we fear, love, and trust the most, right? We talk about that a lot as Lutheran people. What is the answer to all those questions about the 10 Commandments, right? Those regulations, those rules, those guidelines for the best life. We should fear, love, and trust in God so that, and in some ways, that may be the biggest pitfall or the biggest temptation with it, right? That the number does go up. And so I think all three of us, I can speak for all three of us in this, that we're much more happy when it goes up than necessarily when it goes down, right? That sure, we could say we're happy about being able to exchange more of our dirty dollars for the better Bitcoin, but that somewhere there is a part of us that's like, hey, we don't like that. We like it when it goes up, not down. But even more than that, the aspect and the way in which it's a better money, I think is what you're getting at too. That Jesus isn't just interested at the base level of, hey, the heart is the heart. He wants our heart and he wants all that we are. But he wouldn't just be interested in Bitcoin because of that there's much more to it. David, as you heard Ben, anything you want to add to that? Would you answer it differently? Where would you go?
I'm trying to decide. There's two ways. What would Jesus have to say about it? What would Jesus, on his own time, of his own volition, and then for us, as recorded for us, what would Jesus have to say about it? Or would it be more like a reporter in his face, or somebody like us wanting to tweet Jesus? Jesus, are you going to weigh in on this or not? So I'm first of all trying to decide whether he would have anything to say about it at all on his own, or whether it's more like just the reading I preached on this last Sunday in Michigan. Um, John chapter 6, the people get in their boats and they follow him, it says, to the other side, Capernaum, and they've got questions for him, right? And what you find is, like, even from the get-go, they have a question for him. He gives them answer, but he doesn't answer them, so he has a way of doing that. So I'm super curious. Jesus, what do you have to say about Bitcoin? I want that microphone in his face. I want to tweet him on it and see if I can bait him into talking about it. And I'm actually asking myself that question right now as a nuance on your question, Jared. Would Jesus have anything to say about it at all? Possibly not, right? I don't think he would satisfy my questions head on. And that actually goes to what I think would happen. Is it part of God's total providential care for his people and all peoples, such that both the scriptures broadly speak about money and not abusing money, not tipping and tainting the scales, even to the point where Jesus, as Ben said, made mention of money quite a bit. It comes up: give to Caesar what is Caesar, give to God what is God's. Many times, I think the money being better, in a sense, Jesus might not have to make so much mention of it, and then could get to what he really wants to talk about. And actually, you went there, Jared, then right away. I'm thinking of like Matthew 15, where he talks about the heart. The heart is wicked, and out of the heart comes all these other things. So if Bitcoin existed, I almost feel like with less abuse, he'd have less to say about that particular kind of abuse between the powerful and those in their care. I feel like he'd have less to say about it, but he would not have a single bit less to say about the human heart. And this connects then with the previous episode. There are those who say fix the money and fix the world. And I think I said then, and we've talked, and we might have different nuances on this, but I think that is too maximal. I don't think it's true. You can fix the money, and the world still has to contend with David Ruffner and the ways in which I'm a jerk to myself, my wife, my children, my neighbors, people I profess to love, and wake up in the morning aiming to love. We could fix the money, and I would still be here, right? And so would you guys, and so would our listeners. So I'm kind of torn on the issue. I think he might have some different conversations, but then it leads to the same place where he's talking about the heart and removing our hearts of stone, replacing them with hearts of flesh. The type of thing that sounds like riddles and veiled and mystery. And how exactly does one do that? And Jesus would tell them, and they wouldn't be comprehending. And none of them were comprehending until after the resurrection and the gift of the Spirit, when scales came off their eyes as of scales, and now they could see all that Christ had done. And what did he come to do? He came to save people and not a financial system. And yet he deeply cares, both in his earthly ministry and on the heels of the resurrection, deeply cares for us, even in this time, even still in a fallen world, and deeply cares how we carry ourselves in love towards our neighbors. So I don't know if I've answered it a bit, Jared. What do you think?
I think you raised maybe the best question when you said, I don't even know if Jesus would say anything. It's kind of that, when he has an interaction, was John's baptism from heaven or of man? Answer me this first, and then I'll answer you. It's kind of like a sassy Jesus, if you will. But yet, I also feel like there is truth to what you say about how it's about the heart, and that he would like that it's better, but at the end of the day, that's not what he's necessarily here for. He's not concerned for that sort of thing.
The world is still
how that might
a fallen and judged world, whether we have money or not. I don't think between Adam and Eve there was currency, or when it came to Cain and Abel. We're not there yet, right? Small enough group, no need for money. Rather, we have, maybe we could call it a household economy. It is an economy, but money doesn't need to happen. Money doesn't happen. I don't know. We haven't brought this up, but I was looking at it this morning thinking about this conversation. There's something called Dunbar's number. Dunbar's number from a Brit in the 90s. It's pretty current, says that, and different people have said different numbers, but Robin Dunbar said we can only meaningfully have 150 meaningful relationships. So in terms of I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine, sort of a little bit barter, but we're just a tight economy where we don't have to have a money kind of precursor between us. Below $150 people rather, Dunbar's number suggests you can get away with that. Well, go back to that creation. We had a time where there was fewer than 150 people. Money isn't central to creation. And as far as my reading of the life to come, I don't know anything about money, so to speak, there either. I can't think of it, at least, in all that's been given to us. So it is incidental. Well, I should say incidental. It is part of our life together, but it's not integral to either creation itself or to the vision of the life to come. But it is here now. And when it's good, it helps life. And when it's bad, it makes life hard or even terrible. I think we can all agree to that. And so, yeah, fix the money, fix the world. I got to throw that one out the window. I just don't believe it's true. Better money for a better world? Yes. But still, David Ruffner's in that world, Jared Townley, Ben Haupt. And from what I hear from their wives, these guys can be, a little abrasive at times, maybe. I don't know.
Well, and I think maybe this is just my sort of own conscience needing to justify itself. But we've talked behind closed doors that even when we started or released this, that it would, I really wrestled like, hey, I am posting this on Facebook. I'm posting this on, X, that I'm a Bitcoin guy, right? That I'm concerned for this. I think it's worth my social capital, if you want to use those words, to talk about. And that weekend, someone asked me, hey, pastor, one of the people in my church asked me, hey, it's interesting you're posting about this. Like my pastor is telling me what I need to invest in. Like it's strange to me that you want to be known for something other than the gospel of Jesus and, in his term, good preaching. And those words just are echoing in my heart, in my soul, right? Because on one hand, I think people hear about Bitcoin, they see about it, and what they only see has been what kind of you said. It's the number go up thing that, we did parable sermon series this summer here, and I preached on the rich fool. And you know what the rich fool really feels like? Me sometimes when I'm buying Bitcoin, right? I'm trying to stack this stuff. I'm trying to hold this stuff. I'm building my metaphorical Bitcoin barn for tomorrow, right? For myself, for my children, etc. And so, there's a real wrestle for me, at least, that as I talk about this, as we explore it, that, hey, I have to acknowledge that at first glance, I think, if we don't go any deeper into how it works and what incentive systems are in place, which we've talked about a little bit, that in some ways, Jesus could look at my heart and say, Jared, this is not your savior. This will not save you. It will not deliver to you a good life. It will not bring to you what you need most. That is only something I can do. And so in some ways, it's back to the heart thing, right? That Jesus would look at Bitcoin and say, I don't care what it is, but if it's what you're trusting in, then it's the wrong thing, right? And so for me, as I think about that, Jesus might say something like, Bitcoin is a good money, but it's not me, right? And that's a great place to start, and a great place to at least acknowledge kind of what can be or is in a lot of our hearts. I've had people reach out and say, hey, how do I do this? What do they say? I want to make more money. And again, that's not necessarily a problem, but as someone who's concerned for people's souls and their hearts, I have to kind of say, well, that's not the only thing. And I mean, we all have talked about how that's kind of what got us here, and that's where we started, but that it has to kind of go more. So, where I'd like to kind of take us next is, if it's not just about gaining wealth, Ben, you talked a little bit about protecting purchasing power. We've talked about that too. What aspects of Bitcoin do you think Jesus would like the most if we were to say, which might even be foolish, that we could totally remove that sort of human greed aspect out? Because I think there's at least maybe two or three that he would say, this is good for the world. This is good for my followers. Even he might even use that language too. Where do you think you would go if you were to start or answer that sort of question? What aspect do you think he likes about what Bitcoin is?
I mean, I think what we know is that Jesus wasn't just interested in people's souls. He was certainly interested in their salvation, but he was interested in people in a very holistic sense, because Jesus created not just their soul, but also their body and the heavens and the earth, right? And so I think, I mean, it's very interesting what your member says, and I think the church is very well known for, um, you know, it's easy for the church to say we're only interested in the soul, and so we're not going to talk about politics, we're not going to talk about investments, we're not going to talk about medicine or any of these things, and yet um, there are some Lutheran theologians. The one that I've talked about on this podcast before, Hans Ivan, he wanted Lutherans and Christians in general to talk more about things in society like art and history and things like the economy, because he was convinced that the all of the world is Christ's, and that Christians shouldn't give up the their responsibility and duty, let alone their right to talk about things like how money works. That's not out of our purview, and so I think David has summed this up well a number of times, talking about care for neighbor, and Lutherans, that means a lot. Those words, to care for one's neighbor, means a lot, because it shows up in just about every one of the second table of the Ten Commandments. Concern for neighbor, and I think that being concerned about how Bitcoin works is partly about how we take care of our neighbor in some bodily ways that I think are good, right, and pleasing for Christians to be thinking about, because we care for the bodies and not just the soul of our people.
Can you speak like what? I mean, I could speak for you, but I want to throw it back to it. So how does that get played out, right? So if I'm a listener, hey, I like that idea. I like to care for my neighbor. It's Bitcoin cares for my neighbor. That sounds cool. But like, why and how?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we can go down a lot of different rabbit trails, but um, I think it's very obvious that um, Lutherans and that Christians should care about the state, because the government is a way that God oftentimes protects us. In the session that David and I were in, David talked about the state as being a little helper to mom and dad. So God creates mom and dad to care for us, and then he creates these little helpers as an extension of the parental authority. So the government does a lot for us, and we maybe some people would say the government doesn't do anything for me, but um, we it's very easy to take things for granted. We have decent roads, and we've had a somewhat decent, somewhat stable monetary um, policies and that sort of thing, and yet I think the Bitcoin protocol um, takes even better care of people from a monetary standpoint. So preserving the value of our work, helping us to trade fairly our work for the bodily things that we need. Um, God spent a lot of time in the Old Testament talking about scales and honest scales, just scales. Um, so I think a system that is fair and that can't be easily tampered with is pleasing to God in the same way that Luther said God likes clean swept floors. Why does God like clean swept floors? Not because the person that was sweeping the floors was singing a hymn while they were doing it, but just that God is a God of order, and God likes when things are well taken care of and in good order. And I think uh, my argument would be that Bitcoin protocol puts our money in a better order than when a government that can debase the currency is caring for the money.
And so the argument is neighbor, but neighbor by order, right? That there is love and care for someone by knowing what is allowed, what is capable, what is permissible, and what the Bitcoin protocol sets is clear order. Absolutely. I think when I know I've talked about this, but I'll say it again. So I can send you a link that we should throw in the description. But Alex Gladstein talked again about sort of the way in which Bitcoin empowers commerce across the world, right? And I'm spacing out on what the country was that he referenced, but I think it was Afghanistan, where women are not, they're not allowed to have currency themselves, or if they do, their husbands usually take it from them, sort of thing. And what is Bitcoin's? It empowers them to be able to have their own currency, right? To have their own savings. And in that way, we as Christians love our neighbor because we're concerned about justice, right? That's not a dirty word necessarily. That Jesus cared certainly about those things, right? Care for the widow, the poor, the homeless, the refugee, the one in prison. That those were calls for us to do as we follow him. And so, in some ways, Bitcoin is care for neighbor too, because it's a just money, right? That I think we've said phrases like money for enemies, right? That it doesn't matter if you are the president of the United States, a prisoner, if you are in Africa, Australia, New England, it doesn't matter. The rules are the same for you, and there is no advantage, disadvantage for you that Bitcoin gives to you. And so in that way, it is a just and fair network, right? That in that way, it's love for neighbor too. And so I think those are some of the most, at least that one for me is what speaks the loudest to current utility, current usage, that yes, we people in the United States can't understand because we mostly, at least in our privileged state, have a lot of access to banking and services that function like that most people don't necessarily have around the world. David, anything for you if you had to sort of answer the what is Jesus like about it?
You guys have primed me, and I'm maybe just do a real quick on three things. They could each be maybe their own episode, but I'm thinking from creation to the second coming, where the redemptive act of Christ, which begins with his incarnation, taking on our flesh. I mean, we could do a whole episode about that, what Ben is speaking to, that Christ cares about our bodies, that he rose bodily, that he says he's coming back to raise our bodies up. This is a bodily faith. That means a lot. But from the beginning to the picture of what's to come, I've got two themes. One where there's continuity. It started this way and it gets back to this way. And it underlines why Bitcoin might be of interest to us, and congruent and of interest to Christ. I don't want to speak for him. The other one's a bit of a discongruence from the beginning to the end, but it tracks with Bitcoin. And then the third one has to do with that neighbor and the body as well. So I actually start at the third one. As Ben was talking about that bodily, I'm literally thinking of Jesus from the cross. He does not speak down from he spoke from the cross, but he never once says, your tears are wasted because of what I'm doing now. It's all going to work out at the end. You'll see. As if he's carrying forth some party trick, right? And he's therefore, he's seen people in front of him either sneering or dismayed. There were dismayed disciples there. Few of the male disciples, many of the women. No, from the cross, what did he say? I forget the order because I spin these things around. Son, behold thy mother. Mother, behold thy son. So he speaks to his own mother who's losing a son on the cross. And it affects an adoption of sorts, a beautiful adoption. Even though he's about ready he's performing the act of salvation for all the world. They're carrying our judgment, our shame, our guilt. He will rise again and break through death, the power of death. He doesn't treat it at all like a stupid human trick, the old David Letterman stuff, or some sort of party trick. Even then, he's showing concern, neighborly concern. I just love that. Somehow that popped into mind when Ben was speaking. This idea from the beginning of creation and the fall to the end. Here's something that ends up being congruent. God speaks in the beginning. He will speak at the end. And yet, when sin entered in, language was harmed. Even our language. Our words were weaponized. We talk about that. It's kind of cliche-ish, but we weaponize words. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, isn't that a nice nursery kind of jingle? It's just not true. Words hurt me frequently, and I use my words, I'm sure, to hurt other people. But then language is frustrated, right? Well, here's the thing. It's been suggested that money is language. It's a language by which we communicate to others. If I had made this mug, which I didn't, Starbucks did, what I think my time and efforts are worth. And people get to speak back with me with dollars or not to communicate to me whether they think I've said something honest and what I'm communicating, what I've created for them is valuable to them. So money is seen as language, as a communication protocol between people in their labors, where I don't have to be a generalist at everything. I can be a specialist, and I can live amongst other specialists and communicate the value to each other of our labor and of the value of goods and whether we are in agreement or not, and whether those are worthy to me. Well, language was frustrated at the end. The language is restored in Christ, who comes and finally speaks true things to us again, and amazing things. I mean, after the resurrection, peace be with you. Who saw that coming? Either we're running from a God, maybe better still, if we've made him angry, maybe he's left the frame. Maybe kind of as the deist, he's off and gone. Well, there's something possibly favorable about that. If I'm wanting on the ledger and having to make it up, well, maybe at least if he's gone, I don't have to pay him back. But if he's here and he's holy and I'm not, I'm trying to scrape up my righteousness, or at least my righteousness as compared to Jared and Ben, something like this, to get in his good graces. Well, he comes, and by his death and resurrection, he speaks peace to us. He restores language. So the Christian faith cares about words and language. From God to man, man to God, and us to each other, cares deeply about that. So I think we could, tease out a whole episode where money is language, and our concern for fiat is that it's dishonest anymore. You and I have to work for dollars that other people can print or create with a few keystrokes on keyboards like are in front of us. There's something fundamentally dishonest about that. And where language is frustrated, life between people breaks down, right? And there's something much more honest, we could say, about the language of Bitcoin, and we could tease that out. So that's continuity. At the beginning, God spoke. In our rebellion and our sin, we distrusted God. We tried offering words in place of God. We weaponized language. Anyways, Christ has redeemed even language. We're we're called to honesty. Thou shalt not, bear false witness and lie. And there's something wonderful then about Bitcoin. We can tease all that out. Discontinuity. Speaking of Bitcoin as technology, real quickly, I don't know if I've mentioned on the show or not. I know I've mentioned to Ben and Jared a book, and we just saw that it's reissued. Culture Making by Andy Crouch, I believe. He points out that we don't go from pristine garden in Genesis 1 and 2. We get to Revelation, a picture of what's to come. There is a garden there, but the garden is in the midst of a city that's coming down. And Andy Crouch points out that it's not just some sort of reversion back to innocent garden where we're running around now and not wearing anything, right? It's not a return to Eden, so to speak. But he points out that what comes down is the vision that we're given is a city of God. It has walls. It has gates. It has buildings. We think of these as human artifacts. These are, quote unquote, kind of human technologies. And so there's a way in which God's vision of the life to come gives a nod to, he suggests, and I'm kind of suggesting it here, to the best of human technology, the best of human industry, that it's not all bad. It is true where we have cities, it tends to concentrate some portions of human depravity, but it's just concentrated. It's not like there's meth addicts in the city and not in the countryside. It's just concentrated. It's not as if there's homelessness there and not in Big Bear, California. It's here. It's just not as concentrated. But I love that. I think there's something about that here, again, in terms of care of neighbor, in terms of skills and gifts given by God. None of those are the ultimate thing. The one thing needful is Jesus Christ. And we could go to Luke chapter 10 for that, Mary and Martha, right? We've got Christ. But just because Christ is the one thing needful does not mean those other things are to be despised or they're not good things, right, to be exercised. Again, that care of neighbor that Ben's talking about. So again, communication was frustrated. It's restored. We're called to clear communication now. I think we could chase that down. We could chase down Bitcoin as a clear communication protocol. We can see through the path of human history a trajectory of technology. Technology can be used to bad ends, admittedly so. But look at how many good ends it's been used. The length of our lives, our parents' lives, right? It's used to good ends. And even the picture of the new creation somehow gives a nod to human technology, right? In a beautiful way. And all of that circling back around to Christ calling us to care for our neighbors. My care for my neighbor will never be salvific in the way that Christ's is. But good news, Christ is my neighbor's savior. I'm not. I'm freed to be my neighbor's servant, and caretaker and receive their care as well. All right, monologue done. What do you think?
I don't know about you, Ben, but I just heard David say there's going to be Bitcoin in heaven.
Uh-oh.
But I think, seriously, though, I think the way in which you talk about how, technology is part of the new creation, if you will, that's just a thing we don't think about as far as even what is the new creation. Like, I think if we polled people, heaven is a place where you're like this floating angel and, we don't even really talk about anything else. So that, again, could be a whole entire episode. But I love the way, David, that you bring out it's that same thing, the better, right? It's better communication. It's better technology. It's better. Bitcoin is better money for the world. And we could probably sit here and brainstorm a whole bunch of ways that it is better for people, for our neighbor. But as I think about trying to sort of bring us home here, how would Jesus think about Bitcoin? I think I want to go back to what you sort of said right away, David, when I first asked you. Because if we can take away the heart, Jesus is after the heart, first of all. So he would probably say, well, I don't really care about anything if I don't have your heart, your soul. But then I'm also not necessarily interested in what it is, but how it works and what it does. And so we could call it Jesus coin. You could call it whatever you wanted. But he's going to be interested in the way in which it does affect the real world, right? Because Jesus isn't just a savior of tomorrow, right? Jesus says, I have come that you may have life to the full today, sort of thing, that you are saved in Jesus right now, that we pray thy kingdom would come here in our midst. And so in some ways, Jesus, I don't think, would care about what it was, but just how it works and the ways in which it changes the world that people live in. And I think we would say that Bitcoin changes the world for the better. That whether it's those unbanked people, whether it's protecting your savings, not just to be rich, but to be able to live and ultimately to give it all away, right? To serve, whether it's giving you the ability to not have to fund certain things, right? Dollars, where we spend our money, how we spend our money, the things that we save in, allow and influence other people to do things. And if we can, that phrase, opt out to something that doesn't fund those sort of things, that's good and right. That Jesus is concerned about those things. And so if Bitcoin does those things, I don't know if I can say it this confidently, I think Jesus would like the things that Bitcoin does, even if I can't say confidently he likes Bitcoin. Any last words you want to sort of give or share before we close today?
I would only quickly point out, this is kind of opening up a whole nother can of worms, but there's an author, Jason Lowry, who talks about Bitcoin as power. And he suggests, so this came into mind, David, as you were talking about money as language. It's not just language, but even power. And so Lowry talks about Bitcoin kind of like weapons, but it's a soft weapon, and it allows people to negotiate power, potentially, hopefully, kind of the vision. That people would beat their swords into plowshares, right, and do good for their neighbor rather than going to war. I kind of hear Jason Lowry suggesting that Bitcoin could be useful in helping countries to negotiate power, and to trade it more honestly rather than just going to war. Man, would that be? Seems like a pipe dream, and yet these are things worth working on. So throw that out there for what it's worth.
I'll only say that I like that vision
Some
because
ways
the Bible talks about it in both directions, right? Turning plowshares into swords and instruments of warfare, which are by their nature destructive. They work by subtraction, I guess you could say, versus the initial implement, which is one that fosters life amongst many and is open to more, right? But the Bible then talks about as well pounding something from a sword back to the plowshare, and in that way, we've said it before, or if we haven't, it's worth saying here: dishonest money is weaponized against the some, if not the many, by the few, and it is the hope of Bitcoin that it runs that in the other direction, which you just gave to us, Ben, that it turns it back more into a plowshare, which has in its view, insofar as it's been created, the life of many, and not the destruction of many. I like how you pulled that out there, Ben. That's good.
And these are all things that we could parse and pull on so many more strings. But again, it comes back to that better money, right, creates a better world to live in. And we could talk all day about what that necessarily means. But I think we'll end here and just say Jesus, I think, would enjoy the things in which the world that we think is happening, right? It's not necessarily current today. But the world in which Bitcoin lives is a more just, a more fair, a more honest, and a world in which people thrive, right? That it's just a better world to live in than the one we live in today. Not because Bitcoin is Jesus, but because of what it produces and the way in which it changes the world. So I'd be curious for those of you listening, what of this is convincing to you? What do you find most meaningful when you think about what does Jesus think about Bitcoin? Or maybe you have a different idea that I think Jesus would hate this because it's just this thing, or I think he would love it because of this use. We'd love to hear that and love to engage with you in conversation that way. But we are happy that you've been with us. Happy to see you, and we'll catch you on the next one.